Pedro Alonso López obtiene su libertad tras 14 años de prisión en el ex penal García Moreno. Él fue juzgado por 15 crímenes y violaciones, pero tiene un centenar de acusaciones.
March 9th, 1980, a little girl manages to escape from a serial rapist and killer, Pedro Alonso Lopez, in Ambato, Ecuador. This monster is spared from nearly being lynched for the second time in his life because he'd already murdered hundreds of girls. These are the top child serial killers that are still active today.
Erica Wills was one of 5 primary school girls that were slaughtered in the most gruesome way between October 1998 and February 2000. Their link: all were tortured and brutally stabbed countless times to all parts of their bodies.
It's October 9th, 1998, Belize City, Belize. The body of a schoolgirl was found near the George Price Highway. She'd been viciously stabbed over 40 times, her face mutilated in the process, and her left arm nearly severed by the savage butchering. The girl was later identified as Shirley Nicholas. She had disappeared a month before, after leaving home for school. As if that wasn't shocking enough, a very macabre detail would blow the public's mind. Her body had been carefully dressed with the clothes of another girl, Jay Blades, who had been reported missing just 2 days before this finding. This strongly suggested that the island had a serial killer on the loose, and he was bent on taunting investigators and laughing at the public's pain. 6 months later, all doubts were dispersed. Jay's remains were found in an even more nightmarish way. The killer reduced the poor boy to a battered skull and some scattered bones. Panic spread in the streets. Parents started keeping their children indoors. Schools hired armed guards, and nightly curfews were imposed. Nothing stopped the predator's activity. March 25th, 1999. The body of another girl is discovered in a ditch near the same highway where they found the first victim. Jackie Fern Malik had disappeared just 2 days before, during school recess, and her injuries confirmed once more the serial killer's MO: multiple stab wounds and a left arm. But this time, maybe in an attempt to erase evidence or just to desecrate her remains, the killer went further in his brutality and ran over the body, leaving grotesque tire marks on it.
Our old-time neighbor, Michael Williams, now, he approached us and say, let me take you to school.
Michael Williams, a local mechanic and neighbor to Jackie's family, happened to be very close to the girl. He was a viable suspect, often seen offering rides to the girl, so they arrested and charged him in late March 1999, but he was soon proven innocent, as another victim, following the same observed patterns, was found on July 18, 1999, while Michael was imprisoned. Erica Will's skeletal remains were found near Gracie Rock after a 3-day absence that went unnoticed due to miscommunication between her family members. They only could identify her through accessories like her Tweety Bird ring and hairband. Authorities had nothing on Williams, and he was exonerated. The investigation was stalled. February 24th, 2000. A new body was found along the Belize River. It was a girl missing several body parts and dressed in blue jeans. She matched the last known description of Noemi Hernandez, who left her home 9 days before to run an errand and never returned. By this point, investigators thought the perpetrator could have had medical training, or at least access to some specialized tools, since Noemi's wounds showed signs of surgical precision. Furthermore, all the autopsies revealed traces of alcohol and drugs in the victims' bodies, suggesting they could have been chemically subdued before being tortured and killed. But despite deploying FBI profilers and Scotland Yard consultants, creating several theories on the killer's MO, and even circulating sketches of a suspect, the case went cold and all leads vanished.
Shirley Nicholas, Jackie Malik, Naomi Hernandez, Jay Blades, and Wills. It has been almost 2 decades since the shocking murder.
Now a second suspect, Lonnie David Franklin Jr., entered the minds of the locals years later. He was an American serial killer known as the Grim Sleeper. convicted of murdering 10 women in LA between 1985 and 2007. Now, he was married to Sylvia Castillo, a Belizean woman. But there's more. He also possessed an infamous green van linked to the disposal of victims' bodies in the U.S., which was found later abandoned in Belize City. A relative of one of the victims even declared to have seen Franklin in the area during the Ripper's active years, but nothing was conclusive. Moreover, Franklin died in a California prison in 2020. The last hope in this case lies in DNA evidence collected in the late 1990s. It was initially unusable due to technological limitations, but in 2022, Belize's National Forensic Science Service Cold Case Unit planned to re-examine it. School bags, clothing, and other objects would be scrutinized using modern genetic analysis techniques.
It appears that there was more than one person involved, and at some point in time, at least 3 of the girls were held at the same place. There was no evidence to support abuse, so the motivation for their killing is perplexing.
As of 2025, no further advances have been made on the case, and the victims' families argue that the killer or killers may still be alive and out there.
For 2 years, the bodies of Black children had been found in the woods, then the rivers of Atlanta, Georgia. In all, more than 24 victims, most of them strangled.
It's May 22, 1981. The police are patrolling several bridges over the Chattahoochee River in the hopes of catching someone disposing of a body. An elusive killer responsible for the deaths of several Black children in Atlanta, Georgia, was on the loose. At 2:50 a.m., cops hear a loud splash on the waters beneath one of the bridges and rapidly intercept a 1970 Chevrolet station wagon. The driver, Wayne Bertram Williams, 23, lets him search his car, and due to a lack of probable cause, they let him go. But the story doesn't end here. Between July 1979 and May 1981, Atlanta was immersed in terror caused by a series of gruesome deaths. At least 28 children, primarily Black males, including some adolescents and young adults, were abducted. They were all found murdered. The first victim was found in the woods on July 28, 1979. He'd been shot with a .22 caliber weapon, while the second one died of asphyxiation. The following 22 months were filled with the equivalent discoveries in different places and different circumstances. Some boys vanished while running an errand for their moms. Some were taken from public places. One of them was found dead in an abandoned school on November 8th, shackled and bearing head trauma. On March 10, 1980, the first female victim was found, tied to a tree and shackled. Now, the victims' ages and the consistent methods of strangulation or blunt force trauma pointed to a serial predator, and he was on a rampage. By April 1981, with more than a dozen killings and bodies disposed of all over the city, the killer changed his MO and started dumping the kids' bodies in the Chattahoochee River. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Atlanta Police Department were under tremendous public pressure when they decided to step up their hunting game and watch 14 bridges over the Chattahoochee River.
This is that white station wagon. Police followed it and stopped it nearby. FBI agent Mike McComas rushed to the scene. The driver was standing by the highway.
Enter Wayne Bertram Williams, who gradually became a suspect after the cops let him go that night near the river. Without any real leads, they went all in into investigating this 23-year-old Black man that they were sure was linked to these murders. June 21st, 1981. A month after his first encounter with police, Williams was arrested. Investigators put together a convincing puzzle made of pieces of evidence linking him to at least 2 of the murders. Now, they were able to match fibers discovered on the bodies of these victims to those found on a unique carpet type in Williams' home and the trunk of his car. Witness testimony places him in the company of the victims shortly before their deaths. And to make things worse for him, he failed the polygraph examination. They had the perfect suspect in custody. However, Williams pled not guilty. He maintains his innocence to this very day. Williams' sentence is as counterintuitive as it gets. He was only found guilty of the deaths of Nathaniel Carter and Jimmy Ray Payne, 2 adult victims killed in the same fashion as all of the children. Nevertheless, authorities believe his acts can be connected to as many as 23 of the 29 killings. And while there are still many doubts, his 2 consecutive life sentences prevent him from being released anytime soon.
The bottom line is, nobody ever testified or even claimed that they saw me strike another person, choke another person, stab, beat, or kill, or hurt anybody, because I didn't.
According to Williams, it all came down to race. In this interview for CNN, he said,
Atlanta was in a panic over the killings and was bent on convicting a black man because arresting a white man might have sparked a race war, and Atlanta would have gone up in flames.
He would say that the definitive evidence against him was a fabrication to quickly close the case and satisfy the public's thirst for justice.
That fiber evidence may have well been manipulated in this case, point blank and simple. Simply because they had a suspect. It was Wayne. And that manipulation, no doubt, has continued even after my trial and up until this point.
While some experts think that Williams did indeed commit several murders, others do believe that the evidence linking him to the victims was purely circumstantial. If this interpretation is correct, it leaves open the chance that the murders were not all committed by a single perpetrator. A child killer unnoticed and maybe on the loose since the 1980s, probably still active. It doesn't sound too far-fetched, as Williams himself is 66 as of 2025. Now, as recently as March 2019, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms ordered a re-examining of the case's evidence using modern DNA technologies. Now, there haven't been any conclusive breakthroughs or even public debates on the case, but Williams' next audience is scheduled for November 2027. Each and every one of the Atlanta murders remains unsolved.
Kids were vanished from sidewalks and held from 4 to 19 days, and then their bodies were tossed by public roadsides.
It's February 19th, 1976, 11:45 a.m. A businessman finds the body of a boy in a parking lot in unsettling circumstances. Now, there are obvious signs of assault and additional rope burns on his ankles and wrists. Whoever left him there meticulously positioned the body to resemble a mannequin, but the police couldn't find any fingerprints. They only know that the child died of asphyxiation, and later missteps from the coroner's office erased any potential clues from the bodies when the examiners washed them. Now, the boy was identified as Mark Stebbins. He'd vanished 4 days before after a quick call to his mom to inform her that he was leaving the American Legion Hall in Ferndale. He was the first that would never return home thanks to the Oakland County killer, or more hauntingly, the babysitter killer, who operated Michigan between February 1976 and March 1977, preying on boys and girls alike.
I am Jill Robinson's sister.
She packed a backpack, got on her bike.
She was missing from December 21st.
And then left.
And then they found her the day after Christmas.
Saw something red in the ditch.
December 26, 1976. The next victim is Jill Robinson. She fled her Royal Oak home 4 days before after a silly argument over dinner. Now, if this was the work of the same killer, it wasn't obvious from the beginning. The killing method was very different from the first one. Jill's body was dumped on the shoulder of I-75 north of Big Beaver Road, shot execution style with a 12-gauge shotgun to the head. This time, the victim was even fully clothed, and there were no signs of abuse. So, what exactly tied these two cases together? This was the origin of the unnerving nickname, the babysitter killer. Now, her body had been meticulously washed and left in plain sight. Although they had this plausible link between the two crimes, her case quickly went cold as authorities dismissed her as a runaway.
She wanted to get a magazine and some candy.
She disappeared on January 2nd, 1977.
I think it's worthwhile. We have to find the girl. We need information to find the girl.
Christine was kept for 19 days.
January 21st, 1977. The killer's signature becomes a little more evident this time, even when the modus operandi for the killings was still varying. His apparent obsession with cleanliness left a distinctive mark on every new body. A frozen female corpse was found on a snowbank in Franklin Village, her knees drawn up as if sleeping. She was identified as Christine Mihalich, a girl from Berkeley who had disappeared on January 2nd, 1977, after a trip to a 7-Eleven. Now, she'd been suffocated in the same fashion as the first victim, but there were no signs of violence or abuse. The links to the previous murders were circumstantial again. Soap residue under the fingernails. The outfit carefully washed. Now, the final victim would be a boy from Birmingham named Timothy King. He'd vanished on March 16, 1977, after a trip to a pharmacy 3 blocks away from his home. Tensions were high in the neighborhood, as he was the 7th kid to go missing in a short period, and the police interviewed the pharmacy owner and Tim's classmates and would even conduct door-to-door searches, to no avail. Timothy was found 6 days later in a ditch along Gill Road, wearing the same clothes he had on the day he went missing and lying next to his skateboard. Tim's autopsy revealed the same confusing and caring pattern, consisting of bathing the victims, feeding them, and carefully arranging the bodies. Somebody had fed him Kentucky Fried Chicken, his favorite food, groomed him, and then suffocated him. The killer's preferences were also confirmed, as this boy also had evident signs of abuse. FBI profilers suggested some sort of wicked parental instinct permeated the killer's signature. They would theorize that the culprit was a very intelligent white male in his 20s or maybe 30s, compulsively neat and organized. They would narrow down this profile to a possible white-collar worker with flexible hours. That profile was coupled with a clue from witnesses indicating that Timothy King was seen speaking to a man near a car, specifically a blue AMC Gremlin, and they started hunting for this make and model. Hundreds of Gremlin owners were stopped and searched, but the trail went cold among an insurmountable cascade of 18,000 tips. The task force investigating the case was eventually disbanded in 1978. Now, they had several suspects. We had Christopher Bush, a convicted pedophile, gaining attention after a cellmate claimed he'd bragged about killing Mark Stebbins. But Bush committed suicide under suspicious circumstances in 1978 after a sketch resembling Mark was discovered in his home. However, DNA analysis failed to link him with the case in any way. Decades later, another suspect, James Vincent Gunnels. They tied him through hair DNA found on Christine's body, and he also failed 2 polygraphs, but denied involvement, and never again was formally charged, as the evidence was insufficient to prove his direct involvement. This investigation descended into chaos. Authorities desperately tried to link the murders to a child pornography ring operating in North Fox Island, but again, they couldn't find anything conclusive. A couple of other victims, Cynthia Caggio and Sheila Schrock, were considered as part of the case but then later attributed to different lost evidence, jurisdictional rivalries, and a complete loss of tracks threw the case into oblivion.
People are going to see this in more places than ever before. The families think it can be solved if the right person sees it and gets that information. There is DNA that exists. If they get the right name, they can match it up.
And there's information and video that we didn't realize we had in our archives, right. So we're putting it all together.
Yeah.
Modern advances in DNA investigations offered some ephemeral hope to the victims' families. In 2012, the police created DNA profile from old crime scene evidence, but it doesn't match anyone in databases. The case goes cold again, leaving open the very real possibility that the babysitter killer might still be somewhere active in the U.S.
perpetrators of these inhuman acts had been in business for a long time. Human parts littered the area, prepared for potential buyers.
We take you to March 22nd, 2014. A group of motorcycle taxi drivers go searching for a missing colleague and make a gruesome discovery. In a worn-out abandoned compound in Soka Forest, near the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, they find what appear to be survivors of torture, shackled to slaughter benches. There are decomposing corpses all around and scattered human remains, both belonging to adults and the place, now nicknamed the Ibadan Forest, proved to be a spot for money rituals, killings, human trafficking, and a case of systemic corruption allegedly involving the authorities of southwestern Nigeria. The graphic scene was of unimaginable viciousness. 50 human skulls, over 20 decomposing bodies, ripped off scalps with human hair, and personal belongings, including children's clothing and passports, hinting at possible sacrifices. Local authorities found a total of 23 survivors who were sent to the Idaho State Hospital, with 8 of them showing signs of malnourishment and severe psychological trauma. These victims went through hell, ritualized torture, systemic starvation, and even forced cannibalism. Captors had drugged, chained, and subjected them to psychological and physical torture, including forcing them to consume feces. Victims of this nightmare were seemingly selected randomly. A 95-year-old man vanished in 2013 and never returned home. And the children, not just kidnapped ones, but newborn babies. While the victims' traumatic recollections were often scarce and fragmented, some of them recounted in detail how these captors forced male and female victims to have sex and conceive children for ritualistic purposes, which they would kill mercilessly, pounding and crushing them in wooden pots.
Blood stains, human skulls, clothes, shoes, charms, and human hair, perhaps belonging to innocent Nigerians who had embarked on a journey of no return, were there for all to see.
To add insult to injury, locals believe that the operators of this house of horrors were linked to politicians seeking body parts for dark rituals and occult practices. Their involvement may have gone as far as luring victims under false pretenses while posing to be government officials, renewing documents for citizens. However, these allegations have not yet been confirmed. Public outrage had led crowds to flood the site in desperation, so forensic investigations were practically impossible. They contaminated the evidence and even slaughtered cattle walking around the compound in their rage. The police did arrest a couple of security guards stationed nearby, but they never saw or heard anything unusual. In total, authorities arrested at least 8 suspects. One of them, by the name Abedin Akanmu, confessed he was hired by someone named Mosabao to care for the captives, but no real progress was made following that clue. The Federal Criminal Investigation Department, or FCID, partnered with forensic pathologists from the University College Hospital and swept the site for analysis, but the political plot in the darkness quickly thickened. Oyo State Governor Abiola Ajimobi ordered a hasty demolition of the compound, which destroyed the crime scene and quickly organized a mass burial of the human remains with the uncanny excuse of needing the plot to build a secondary school.
These Nigerians attribute these dastardly acts to greed. They, however, want the authorities to check the activities of ritual killers.
Public outrage skyrocketed over the lack of autopsies and the failure to properly identify victims or even preserve evidence. Rumors of collusion between perpetrators and local authorities gained more traction when local youths accused police officers of ignoring their reports and calls for help when a person went missing. They even reported how the cops would solicit sexual favors from women trying to report a kidnapping. In 2014, several task force members were allegedly removed from their positions, but the process wasn't transparent to the public. Authorities never offered any consolation or justice to the victims' families, Key suspects, including the mysterious Mosa Bao, the figure in charge of these horrible ritual killings of men, women, and children, remain at large.
Cometido el hecho, ¿cómo enterraban a los cuerpos?
Eso quedaba semi-sepultado.
¿Cómo es eso?
Así como cuando se muere un semimoviente animal, ¿no?
It's April 1980. A flash flood in Ambato, Ecuador exposes the remains of 4 girls who had been buried in shallow graves. The bodies show clear signs of abuse and strangulation, a pattern that authorities will identify too late. Hundreds of victims late. They were all victims of the monster of the Andes. Born October 8, 1948, in Venadillo, Colombia, Pedro Alonso Lopez was the 7th of 13 kids conceived in extreme poverty by a local prostitute. Without a father figure and under the iron fist of a strict mother who used to beat him with a broomstick whenever he misbehaved, this poor boy grew up in an unstable and unloving environment. On the national scale, Colombia was going through a phase of intense political turmoil known as la violencia, or the violence, in which disappearances and deaths were the order of the day. On the home front, Pedro was just 9 years old when he attempted to rape one of his sisters and then was thrown into the streets by his mother. A long history of sexual assaults seemed to have formed the man who would later become the monster of the Andes. He arrived in Bogota as a hitchhiker and was abused by someone who pretended to help him. At 12, he was abused again by a teacher and returned to the streets after a family had taken him in. At 21, he became a prominent car thief and ended up in prison, where 4 inmates brutally gang. This time, though, he decided to take revenge and kill all his perpetrators, receiving only 2 additional years as these killings were seen as self-defense. Lopez was released in 1978. And when he got out, he goes on a murderous frenzy across Peru, Ecuador, and Colombia. Absolutely unable to engage with any adult women due to the relationship with his mom and years of pornography addictions, he targeted young girls. He would focus on indigenous children because, according to his own words,
white parents were too vigilant,
and he needed to commit his crimes during the day. He lured these poor girls to remote areas with the promise of gifts or candy before raping and strangling them. He even reportedly committed acts of necrophilia in moments when his urges were so strong that he would dig up the bodies he had just buried.
Seleccionaba a la persona o a la persona que asomaba.
Como usted lo acaba de decir, a la persona que asomaba.
¿Qué les decían?
Bueno, yo no sabía esto sobre el estupro, la morbosidad. Aprendí.
Nobody was investigating these murders. Local authorities were utterly uninterested, or maybe incompetent. His killing spree was almost interrupted in 1979 when a Peruvian tribe caught him attempting to abduct a new girl. He was nearly lynched, but an American missionary convinces the tribe to hand him to the authorities, and he was deported to Colombia without charges. April 1980. A flash flood in Ambato, Ecuador, exposes the remains of 4 girls buried in shallow graves. The girls had been reported missing and were believed to be the victims of human trafficking. Still, the bodies, with clear signs of violence and strangulation, prompted a new investigation. Only 12 days later, he tried to lure a girl named Maria Poveda, but she would alert her mother, and this prompted Lopez's arrest. Once again, he faced a mob of angry people before police took him into custody. Lopez was cornered, but he initially refused to admit his guilt. He would even make up this individual who forced him to kill under a constant death threat. Cordoba Gudino, a Catholic priest, gained his trust while incarcerated and made him confess his crimes. Without any signs of remorse, the monster commented on what seemed to be a ritual of his own.
I forced the girls to have sex with me and put my hands around their throat. When the sun came up, I shot them. It was good only if I could see their eyes. I never killed anyone at night. It would have been a total waste in the dark. I had to see them in the light. light of day, there was this divine moment when I put my hands around their neck and watched the light in their eyes go out. Only those who kill know what I mean.
He confessed years later. The monster of the Andes, as the media would later nickname Lopez, had abused and killed more than 300 girls. At first, the police were reluctant to believe these numbers, but Lopez guided them to the remains of 53 victims near Ambato. However, he claimed there were more than 110 girls in Ecuador and an additional 240 across Peru and Colombia. As hard as this is to believe, Ecuador's max sentence at the time was merely 16 years. Lopez only served 14 years of that sentence and was released for good behavior in 1994 and deported back to Colombia.
Yo soy la revelación de los seres humanos porque todavía no he procreado una semilla. No hay amor.
He was briefly admitted into a mental institution in Colombia, but was declared sane in 1998. The most prolific child killer in history, followed only by Colombian boy killer Luis Alfredo Garavito, was released on a $50 bail. He was seen for the last time in 1999 while renewing his citizenship in Bogota. Interpol had issued a warrant in 2002 for a murder matching his methods, but it was deactivated in 2005 and left as a cold case. Rumors persisted, and he was vaguely remembered by authorities while investigating another homicide in Tuna, Colombia, in 2012. No conclusive evidence has been found to confirm either his death or his involvement in new crimes. Today, Pedro Alonso Lopez could be a retired 77-year-old serial killer still walking among us.